On the 25th of May, 1982, a gripping aerial drama unfolded as two pairs of Argentinian jets thundered at wave-top level over the desolate, wind-swept landscape of the Falklands Islands, embarking on what they fully understood might be a one-way mission. At the lead was Captain Pablo Carballo, guiding his men as they piloted their aging and poorly equipped A-4 Skyhawk jets, venerable but outmatched attack planes burdened with heavy bombs. Their singular, desperate objective was the elimination of two formidable British warships, the HMS Coventry and the HMS Broadsword. The Argentinians, having recently seized the islands, which they referred to as the Malvinas, knew that their fragile grip on the territory depended entirely on their ability to neutralize the British naval threat. Their intelligence was solid. The two warships had daringly moved closer to the islands, positioning themselves to provide critical anti-aircraft cover for British ground troops. This aggressive posture, however, created a vulnerability. It gave the Argentinian pilots a narrow corridor to exploit the island's terrain, a chance to fly below the radar and approach their targets undetected. As they crossed the threshold into the enemy's perceived radar envelope, Carballo's order was absolute: don't climb for any reason. The Skyhawks descended, hugging the rugged contours of the land so closely that their fuselages seemed to skim the earth. Their targets were modern fighting vessels, equipped with advanced anti-air missile systems, the long-range Sea Dart on Coventry and the short-range Seawolf on Broadsword, and powerful radars that had already proven devastatingly effective against Argentinian aircraft. This low-level, high-risk dash was their only conceivable chance of survival. Aboard the HMS Coventry, Captain David Hartdyke maintained a high state of alert, the tension on his bridge palpable. British Special Forces had relayed a stark warning that an Argentinian strike mission had just launched, yet he had no specific intelligence indicating that his own ship was the primary target. His worst fears were realized when four distinct contacts materialized on the radar screen, prompting the chilling report from his operator. 4 contacts bearing 225, range 30. Without a moment's hesitation, Captain Hartdyke ordered the crew to action stations. Alarms blared across both British ships, a deafening call to battle, and the mighty Sea Dart surface-to-air missile launchers swiveled, turning to bear on the incoming threat. At that precise instant, the Skyhawks reached Pebble Island, known to them as Isla de Borbón, and with exceptional skill, they dove behind its contours, effectively using the landmass as a shield. This daring act of airmanship made them instantaneously invisible to the British radar. On the Coventry's bridge, the contacts simply vanished. The operator's update was the one Hartdyke had dreaded: contacts lost over Pebble Island. The island was perilously close. The Sea Dart missiles, designed for long-range intersection, had a minimum effective range. They were like long spears, useless in a knife fight. Now they would be fortunate to get even a single shot off. Hartdyke immediately raised the broadsword on the radio, his voice tense, knowing his partnership, equipped with the agile short-range Seawolf missiles, was now their best defense for a close-quarters engagement. In the Argentinian cockpits, Carballo led his men as close as he dared, concealed by the terrain. His aircraft were effectively blind, lacking any radar or modern warning systems, relying solely on the pilot's eye. Then, at a distance of 10 nautical miles, they cleared the landmass, and their targets appeared, 2 gray shadows on the churning sea. Starting the attack, Carballo broadcast. He and his wingman, Lieutenant Carlos Wrinkle, shoved their throttles to maximum power and dropped, skimming the tops of the waves. Aboard the Coventry, the 2 streaking jets instantly reappeared on the radar, bright and hostile. 2 hostiles bearing 192 low level. Compounding the chaos, a friendly British Harrier jump jet, which had been on patrol, reported its position directly within the firing zone. Captain, friendly aircraft 20 miles out. Hartdyke was faced with an agonizing choice: a friendly plane and two enemy jets occupying the same small slice of sky. In a split-second decision born of brutal necessity, he made the call. Turn the Harrier away. Shoot missiles. But his operators, struggling against the laws of physics, still couldn't get a lock. The Argentinians were flying impossibly low, mere feet from the sea. Carvalho's canopy was plastered in sea salt as he flew through the ocean spray, so low that the sophisticated British radars couldn't distinguish the jets from the surface clutter of the waves. On the Coventry, men's hearts hammered as the deadly Sea Dart missiles failed to lock, the enemy growing larger by the second. Captain Hartdyke felt the crushing dread of a potentially fatal decision, praying that broadsword Seawolf system would come through. Aboard the broadsword, the crew had the targets. The Skyhawks were flying in such tight formation that the Seawolf's radar initially interpreted them as a single larger aircraft. The system locked on as the jets barreled down, but then, at the last moment, the single contact split into two distinct targets. The conflicting coordinate data overloaded the missile guidance computer, causing the system to crash. "The missiles are not responding. Restart them," came the frantic reply, but there was no time. On the Coventry, lookouts, now able to see the Skyhawks with their naked eyes, screamed in alarm. In a final, desperate act of defense, HMS Coventry's deck guns swiveled and opened fire, joined by the chaotic roar of personal machine guns and rifles, as sailors from across the deck fired at the incoming planes. Carvalho saw the sea around him churn with the splashes of cannon shells and the green lines of tracers drawing closer, the British gunners refining their aim. The enemy ship was right there. He could taste victory, but the wall of flak was becoming too dense. He could feel it. They were not going to make it. He commanded, "Change to the other one," making the snap decision to swap targets, setting his sights on the broadsword. The two jets banked violently, pulling away from Coventry's concentrated fire, and roared by its deck as they lined up for their pass on the second ship. Both pilots released their 1,000-pound bombs. The massive munitions fell, struck the ocean surface, and then, in a bizarre spectacle, bounced upward, skipping across the water like giant flat stones. Sailors on the broadsword watched in disbelieving horror as the bombs bounded toward them. One bomb lost momentum and sank just short of the hull, but the other, however, struck true, punching cleanly into the side of the broadsword. But instead of exploding, it was deflected upwards by the internal structure, burst out of the flight deck, and tumbled harmlessly into the sea on the far side. A dud. Carvalho was aghast, but the assault was not finished. Coming in right behind them was the second flight. First Lieutenant Mariano Angel Velasco and Ensign Jorge Nelson Barrianuevo, their jets armed with smaller, but hopefully more reliable 250-kilogram bombs. Back on the British ships, all four contacts were now painted on the radar screens. Captain Hartdyke ordered an immediate hard turn to starboard, a maneuver intended to bring all his missile systems to bear on all targets. Coventry's operators managed to get a lock on Velasco's approaching jet. "Shoot!" A brilliant flash lit the Coventry's deck as the Sea Dart missile rocketed away in a plume of smoke. But just as it launched, Velasco and his wingmen reacted, pushing their jets even lower, their wings just feet from the water. They vanished from the British radar. The missile, suddenly blind, went straight, losing its track as the sailors watched aghast. Velasco saw the missile fly wide, 500 meters to his right, but his eyes never wavered from his target, HMS Coventry. The broadsword, meanwhile, was in the midst of a frantic system reboot. Its sailors stared at blank, dark screens, caught in a desperate race between the Skyhawks and their rebooting computers. "Come on!" The screens flickered back to life, and the sailors scrambled. The Skyhawks were detected and appeared on the Seawolf radar. The launchers turned. The target was locked. But then, in a final, fatal moment of tragic irony, they saw the HMS Coventry, in its desperate turn to engage, sail directly in front of their launcher. "God damn it!" The Coventry is in the way!" In their rush to defend themselves, the flagship had inadvertently blocked the only missiles that could have saved them. Broadsword's captain tried to maneuver for a clear shot, but it was far too late. In the Skyhawks, Velasco and Barrionuevo were on their final approach. On the Coventry, Captain Hartdyke ordered all turrets to fire at will. A torrent of fire erupted as cannons and machine guns desperately tried to swap the planes from the sky. But the main 4.5-inch gun sights, the crew realized with horror, were misaligned, sending shells uselessly into the sea. In that same instant, the 20mm anti-air gun jammed. Men desperately tried to clear the malfunction as the Argentinian planes closed the final distance. "Brace! Brace! Brace!" the command echoed over the intercom as officers ordered everyone to hit the deck. Men dove for cover, holding on, waiting for the inevitable impact. Velasco saw the enemy ship fill his entire view. He squeezed the trigger, and his A-4's 20mm cannons stitched a line of fire across the ship's deck and superstructure. He held the trigger down as long as he could, then released his payload. The bombs fell away, arcing lazily for a split second before slamming into the HMS Coventry with force, the impact resonating through the ship as two almost hollow thunks. They had punched deep inside the hull, but there was no immediate explosion. The second A-4 roared overhead, its payload stubbornly failing to release. A tense silence fell, stretching for agonizing seconds. The men, confused, began to get back on their feet. A voice came through the intercom reporting damage in the... But he never got to finish his sentence. The bombs detonated. Two massive, catastrophic explosions ripped the HMS Coventry apart. In the air, the Argentinian pilots erupted in sheer primal elation, their shouts of "Woohoo, ha ha ha! Boom, dude! Go! Long live the nation!" They had done it. One explosion, ripping through the ship right under the bridge, tore a gaping hole in the hull, instantly destroying the computer room and sending a devastating fireball up through the corridors, blasting through the operations room where Captain Hartdyke and his entire command team had been working. The second bomb exploded deep within the forward engine room, starting an uncontrollable fire and instantly cutting all electrical and propulsion power. Captain Hartdyke struggled back to consciousness in a new hell, surrounded by thick smoke, twisted metal, and the sounds of destruction. Screams filled the air, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He staggered to his feet, the deck already listing heavily beneath him. He tried to use his intercom, but it was completely dead. The ship was dying. He knew he had to get out. Captain Hartdyke slowly, painfully worked his way through the smoke-filled, cracking corridors and somehow found an exit, emerging into the cold, sharp air of the South Atlantic. Now on deck, his first thought was for his men, and he was met not with the chaos he expected, but with an astonishing display of professional calm. His team had practiced this exact scenario, and they were springing into action. Men were rescuing their fellow sailors from smoke-filled cabins, administering medical attention on the tilting deck, while others calmly prepared the survival rafts and helped sailors don their survival gear. Captain Hartdyke, dazed and wounded, felt the deck shift violently as the hull continued to list. He had to sit down on the rapidly capsizing hull while his men abandoned the ship. After ensuring all the men were gone, Hartdyke was alone on the upturned hull of the Coventry. He cast one last look around his smoking, ruined command. He had done his duty, and finally, fulfilling the solemn tradition as the last man aboard, he entered the last survival raft and drifted away. Because of the incredible professionalism and training of the British crew, 170 survivors would be picked up from the frigid water by the crew of HMS Broadsword and British rescue helicopters. But tragically, 19 sailors lost their lives in the battle. All of the Argentinian pilots made it back to their base and landed successfully. They had achieved a stunning and decisive tactical victory, but it would not be enough to turn the tide of the war.